They already printed the wedding invitations, without my name, even though I paid for everything. That was the moment I realized they never saw me as family. I was just the backup wallet, the niece, the orphan girl they tolerated until I became inconvenient. My name's Elin Palmer. I'm 32, single, and I run a boutique event planning business in Savannah. It's nothing fancy, but I built it from scratch after my parents died in a car crash when I was 19. The only reason I could go to college, start my business, and stay afloat was because of the inheritance my grandmother left me. She was my mom's mother, and she loved me fiercely. Something I didn't realize was rare in this family until she passed away last year. Her will was clear. I got the apartment she owned downtown and the bulk of her savings. My aunt, Clara, my mom's older sister, got a smaller portion, plus a few personal items. That didn't sit well with her. Not because she needed the money. Clara and her husband run some kind of real estate firm in Charleston. They're loaded. But Clara doesn't like losing, especially not to me. She didn't say anything after the reading of the will. Just nodded tightly and said, "Of course, Mother always had a soft spot for you." But I saw the way her jaw clenched. I should have known that was the start of something. Fast forward 8 months. Her daughter, Ivy, my cousin, got engaged. Ivy is everything Clara ever wanted in a daughter. Polished, well-connected, a complete snob. Naturally, the wedding had to be extravagant. And of course, the venue they wanted had already been booked solid for over a year. Except, it wasn't booked for their date. It was booked for mine. I had reserved that exact venue for a high-profile charity gala I'd been planning for months, one that would have given my business more exposure than I could ever buy. But one phone call from Clara, and I caved. She didn't ask me, she just told me. "Elin, you're not married. You're not even seeing anyone. Ivy's wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Surely you understand." She said it like it was obvious, like I was selfish for hesitating. I gave up the date. But that wasn't the end of it. Clara started leaning on me for everything: floral vendors, catering contacts, venue design. She said Ivy loved my aesthetic and that I could handle the details. At first, I told myself it was family, that maybe, just maybe, this would bring us closer. I even offered to help coordinate parts of the day officially, and they agreed. I signed the contracts under my company's name. I paid the deposits up front, expecting they'd reimburse me later. Clara insisted it was easier that way. They never reimbursed me. Last Friday, I drove to Charleston to finalize details. I was feeling uneasy. Clara hadn't returned my emails in a week. Ivy was ghosting me, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when I got there. The printed invitations were on the coffee table, cream-colored with gold foil, elegant, expensive, and nowhere did it say, "Planned by Elin Palmer." There was no acknowledgement, no credit. In fact, the contact info at the bottom was listed under Clara Marlowe Events, a company that doesn't even exist. I stared at the stack of envelopes like they might burst into flames. I asked Ivy, quietly, what happened. She laughed. "Oh, that? Mom thought it would look classier this way. We didn't want people thinking we hired family. You understand." I stood there frozen. But then Clara walked in, cool as ever, sipping her espresso like she hadn't just spit on my name. "Elin," she said, tilting her head, "it's not personal. You're just the niece. This is Ivy's big day. Let's not make it about you." Her words hit harder than any slap I've ever felt. I looked at the stack of contracts in my bag. The venue, the florist, the caterer, the string quartet, the valet service. Every one of them was booked under my company's name and charged to my business account. She had no idea. But she would soon. I didn't say a word as I left the house. Not when Ivy rolled her eyes. Not when Clara gave me that tight-lipped smile, the one she uses when she thinks she's won. I walked out to my car, shut the door, and just sat there. My fingers were shaking. My breath came in short bursts. I stared through the windshield, watching a pair of robins hop across the lawn like the world hadn't just collapsed around me. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about the fact that I had been erased. Again. I drove back to Savannah that night, my mind spiraling the whole way. Every mile on the highway peeled back another memory. Every slight, every dismissal, every time Clara looked at me like I was something she had to tolerate. She didn't raise me, my mom did. But when Mom died, Clara swept in like a queen without a throne. She didn't cry at the funeral. She just asked where the will was. For a while, I convinced myself I could survive her. I stayed polite, professional, restrained. I smiled through clenched teeth and called it grace. But deep down, I knew what she thought of me. What they all thought of me. "You're just the niece." That sentence kept echoing. Over and over. Like it had been waiting years to be said out loud. By the time I reached my apartment, it was almost midnight. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and opened my laptop. The folder was still there. Ivy and Nathan wedding. Contracts, timelines, deposits. Every single vendor listed under Elin Palmer Events. All paid for. All traceable. All mine. Clara didn't know it, but she hadn't just disrespected me. She'd handed me a loaded weapon. The next morning, I called the venue manager, Rebecca. We'd worked together before. She sounded cheerful, until I asked to confirm who was listed on the contract for May 18th. "You are?" she said. "Elin Palmer Events." "Why?" "Just checking." I stared at the screen, heart pounding. She couldn't even change the name on the reservation without my permission. And there it was. My leverage. My line in the sand. I didn't do anything right away. I needed to be sure. That this wasn't just me being emotional. That they really meant to cut me out. So I waited. The next Saturday, I drove back to Charleston unannounced. Clara opened the door with that same pinched expression. Ivy was inside, sipping champagne with her bridesmaids. The house was buzzing. Swatches of fabric everywhere. Boxes of favors stacked in corners. The florist was in the dining room, going over centerpiece designs. I stood there in the hallway, invisible. "Elin?" Ivy said, not even bothering to hide her surprise. "Didn't know you were coming." I ignored her, walked past them all, and headed straight upstairs. My room, the guest room I always stayed in, was already packed. My suitcase and toiletries shoved in a plastic bin. Ivy's name was scribbled on a piece of masking tape taped to the door. They'd cleared me out. No warning, no message. Just gone. I turned, went downstairs, and found Clara in the kitchen reviewing catering options with some assistant. "You moved my things?" I asked, keeping my voice low. She didn't even look up. "We needed the space. Ivy's stylist is flying in early. You weren't planning to stay long, were you?" That was it. The moment I stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt. The moment I stopped making excuses for her cruelty. "I want a full breakdown of every expense," I said calmly. "Receipts, reimbursements. I'll be submitting final invoices next week." Clara looked up, finally, her expression icy. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. I'm done being your unpaid planner." Her lip curled. "You're not entitled to anything. You offered. And besides, this whole thing was your grandmother's money, not yours." That last line hit like a punch to the chest. Not because it hurt, but because it confirmed what I'd suspected all along. She never respected me. She resented me. I turned to leave, but just before I reached the door, I passed Ivy and one of her bridesmaids whispering in the hallway. I wasn't meant to hear it, but I did. "Isn't Elin supposed to be out of that apartment soon?" "Yeah," Ivy said, smirking. "Mom already found a buyer. Elin just doesn't know yet." I stopped cold. They were planning to sell my apartment, the one my grandmother left to me. And suddenly, everything snapped into focus. They weren't just erasing me from the wedding. They were erasing me from everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch in my apartment, lights off, laptop open, staring at the glowing list of contracts in front of me. My inbox was full, emails from vendors, RSVP updates, catering confirmations, timeline requests. All of it routed through my company, my business, my inheritance, and they were planning to sell my apartment behind my back? They thought I was still the quiet little girl from my mother's funeral, the one who didn't fight back, the one who let herself be taken in by Clara like a charity case. But I wasn't that girl anymore. By morning, I had a plan. First, I called my lawyer, a good one, my grandmother's old estate attorney, Mr. Lansing, who still wore bow ties and remembered my birthday. He was shocked. "Elin, if what you're saying is true, Clara's actions violate multiple clauses of the will." "I have proof," I said, voice cold. "She's planning to sell the apartment. She's using my name and business to run a wedding without my consent. I want it stopped." He didn't hesitate. "Send me everything." By noon, I'd sent over screenshots, emails, payment receipts. The works. But I wasn't finished. That afternoon, I drove back to Charleston, again. I told Clara I needed to confirm last-minute details for the rehearsal dinner. She didn't even look suspicious, just smirked and told me not to be late. They were so sure I'd never push back. That night, I stayed at a hotel instead of the house. I spent hours mapping it all out. How many vendors were still in the loop, which ones had cancellation clauses, and exactly how much damage I could inflict with a single phone call. But I wanted more than cancellation. I wanted clarity. So the next morning, I drove to the county records office. It took one request form, one polite smile, and $14 in processing fees to get a copy of the pending sale documents Clara had filed. She'd already submitted paperwork to transfer the deed to a private buyer. My apartment, the one I lived in, the one legally left to me. She'd listed it under the name Clara Marlowe, custodian. Custodian, as if I were a minor. Or worse, incapable of managing my own life. I called Mr. Lansing immediately. "This is real," I said. "She's already filed the transfer." There was a pause on the line, then his voice turned sharp. "She has no legal standing to sell that property. I'll file a court injunction by morning." I should have felt relief, but all I felt was rage. I went back to the hotel, pulled up the guest list for the wedding, and stared at Ivy's name in big, bold cursive at the top. All her vendors, all her glamour, all because I let them use me. Not anymore. That night, I sent my first email. To the florist, due to a breach of agreement and misuse of company assets, Elin Palmer Events is terminating this contract effective immediately. No delivery will be required on May 18th. The cancellation fee, waived. I owned the business. I called the shots. Then the band. The caterer. The valet company. Each one with a carefully worded message. By midnight, I had shut down 6 major pieces of the wedding, but it wasn't enough. So I made one more stop, one they never saw coming. I logged into the venue portal. Reservation still active. Under my name. I clicked Modify Reservation, then Cancel Booking, then Confirm. It was done. The wedding no longer had a venue. And just as I was about to log off, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A new email had just arrived. From Clara. Subject line, Reminder. Please transfer the final payment from Elin Palmer Events account. She was trying to use my business card to pay for Ivy's honeymoon. First-class tickets, 5-star resort, totaling over $9,800. My hands trembled as I opened the attached invoice, and that's when I saw the name of the travel agent, my ex, the one who ghosted me a year ago after Clara conveniently invited him to Thanksgiving without telling me. They'd been working together behind my back. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, as the pieces locked into place. They hadn't just used me. They'd been planning this for over a year. I didn't sleep the night I found out about the honeymoon. My fingers ached from typing, my eyes burned from staring at the screen, but my mind wouldn't shut off. They'd planned it. The wedding, the apartment, even using my ex as their travel coordinator. Clara wasn't just taking advantage of me, she was removing me. Piece by piece, until nothing was left. Except this time, I had leverage. By 7 a.m., I'd canceled every remaining vendor. The string quartet, the cocktail hour pianist, the tent company, even the ice sculpture delivery. All of it, gone. The rehearsal dinner, canceled. The The wedding planner they tried to hire behind my back? Notified and told there was no budget because the actual account holder had pulled out. But I wasn't finished. I called the travel agency. My ex, Brandon, answered. His voice faltered when he heard it was me. Elin? Hey. I cut him off. Don't charge a single cent to my company account. Not for Ivy. Not for anyone. I've already filed a fraud alert. He tried to stammer something about miscommunication, but I hung up before I heard it. Then came the final strike. I called the venue again. Rebecca, the manager, sounded tense. Is this about the cancellation? We've had 3 different people call trying to reinstate the booking. I laughed once, sharp and cold. Let me guess. One of them was Clara? Yes. She said there'd been a mistake, but we can't release the date unless you approve it. You won't, I said, because I'm using it. A beat of silence. For what? And right then, the last piece clicked. I'd already paid for everything. And the guest list? It had been shared with my company email weeks ago. I had the names, the addresses, even the seating chart. So I told Rebecca the truth. I'm throwing a new event, same date, same venue, but it's not a wedding anymore. What kind of event? I smiled into the phone. A memorial. A memorial? She echoed, confused. Yes, for my grandmother, I said. A woman who actually deserved to be honored. Rebecca paused. Then, to my surprise, she said, You know what? I think that's beautiful. Let me know how we can support you. I spent the next 2 days redesigning everything. No ivory linens, no soft blush florals. I swapped it all for violet and white, Grandma's favorites. The band was replaced by a single violinist. I printed fresh invitations, not digital ones, and overnighted them to the guest list Clara never bothered to check twice. And on each invitation was a single line, In loving memory of Margaret Palmer. Join us for an evening of remembrance and truth. I knew exactly what I was doing. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. Charleston air was thick with humidity, clouds sagging like they knew something was about to break. At 3 p.m., Clara was still convinced she had a wedding. At 3:15, guests began arriving at the venue. Some in tuxedos, some in cocktail dresses. All of them confused. The signage at the front entrance was clear. This is not a wedding. At 3:30, Ivy showed up. No white dress, no bridesmaids, just rage. She saw the sign, stormed past security, and found me standing in the center of the ballroom, arranging the last set of violet hydrangeas. What the hell is this? She snapped. I didn't even flinch. It's a memorial for the woman who left me everything you tried to steal. You ruined everything. No, I said, turning toward her. You did that when you forgot who actually held the keys. And then Clara burst in. Her hair was frazzled, her heels clicking like gunshots across the marble. Elin, she hissed. We had 100 guests invited. Do you have any idea how this looks? Yes, I said. And so do they? I stepped aside, and that's when the projector screen lit up. A photo of Grandma smiling on her porch appeared. Then another, me and her planting flowers in the backyard. Then came the audio, a voice recording. Her voice. I know Clara's going to try to take what's Elin's, but I trust her to stand up when the time comes. My home, my money, it's hers. She's the only one who loved me without condition. Clara's face turned white. The guests gasped. And that's when my lawyer stepped out from behind the curtain, holding a folder. Ladies and gentlemen, he said calmly, this recording is part of the sealed addendum to Margaret Palmer's will. We've filed to open probate investigation as of this morning. Clara didn't speak. Not when the audio finished. Not when the lawyer handed her the envelope. Not when half the room turned to stare at her like they'd just realized who she really was. Ivy, on the other hand, exploded. She stormed out of the ballroom in heels far too high for a fast exit, knocking over a floral arrangement on her way. One of the guests, a family friend, muttered, Classy. under her breath as she picked a petal off her lap. But Clara? She just stood there, frozen. I could almost hear the calculations running through her head. Reputation, money, control, all of it slipping through her fingers. The lawyer, Mr. Lansing, addressed the guests with the calm precision of a man who had waited years for justice to catch up. "The recording you heard was part of an addendum to the original will," he said. "Margaret Palmer's wishes were clear. The apartment, the financial holdings, and any business interests associated with Elin Palmer events are solely the property of Ms. Elin Palmer." Someone gasped. Another whispered, "I thought Clara was managing the estate." Mr. Lansing gave a polite but pointed nod. "That was a misrepresentation." I could see the color drain from her face. "I've already filed a formal injunction to prevent the sale of Elin's apartment," he continued, "and we are pursuing legal action regarding misappropriation of funds and fraudulent use of business resources." Clara blinked but didn't argue. Because she couldn't. She knew she'd been caught. What happened next spread through Charleston faster than I could have imagined. Within 48 hours, Clara's name was the subject of every whisper at the club, every coffee shop, every afternoon charity brunch. People love a scandal, but they love a fall from grace even more. Vendors she had worked with for years suddenly stopped returning her calls. Her real estate firm quietly removed her name from the website. Ivy deleted every photo related to the wedding and locked her Instagram. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The silence spoke for me. A week later, I received an official letter from Clara's lawyer offering a settlement agreement if I dropped all legal actions. It was thinly veiled desperation. I declined. Instead, I filed a civil claim for business fraud and defamation. Clara tried to spin it, saying it was just a misunderstanding between family. But the paper trail didn't lie. Neither did Grandma's voice. Months passed. The court sided with me. Clara was ordered to pay restitution for every unauthorized charge, along with damages to my business reputation. The apartment? Locked under my name. Untouchable. The wedding? A memory buried under embarrassment and whispers. As for Ivy, she never apologized. She sent me a single message on Facebook, just one line. "Hope you're proud of yourself." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't need to say anything. The truth had already been spoken, and finally, I had peace. I used the remaining money from the settlement to expand my company. Opened a second office in Charleston, just a block from the venue where it all went down. I named it Margaret and Bloom. Every day, I walk past that building with my head high, knowing I fought for what was mine, and won. Not out of spite, but out of survival. Because if I'd let them erase me again, there wouldn't have been anything left to rebuild. Clara still lives in Charleston, but we haven't spoken since the trial. Last I heard, Ivy moved out of state, a new city, a fresh start. Good for her. I didn't burn the bridge. They did. I just made sure they remembered what it felt like when the ground disappeared beneath them. And now, whenever someone asks me why I stood up to my own family, I tell them this. Because love should never come with conditions. And silence was killing me louder than any fight ever could. Sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to stop apologizing for existing. Comment the number 1 if you believe Clara got what she deserved. And tell me, have you ever had to choose yourself over your family? I want to hear your story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more real revenge stories like this one.